Chapter 15 of The Trail of the Lonesome Pine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Vendetti, MikeVendetti.com. The Trail of the Lonesome Pine by John Fox, Jr. Chapter 15. Hand in hand, Hale and June followed the footsteps of spring from the time June met him at the schoolhouse gate for their first walk in the woods. Hale pointed to some boys playing marbles. "That's the first sign," he said with quick understanding. June smiled. The bird-like piping of hylas came from a marshy strip of woodland that ran through the center of the town, and a toad was croaking at the foot of Imboden Hill. And they came next. They crossed the swinging footbridge, which was a miracle to June, and took the footpath along the clear stream of South Fork, under the laurel which June called ivy, and the rhododendron which was laurel in her speech. And Hale pointed out catkins greening on alders in one swampy place, and willows just blushing into life along the banks of a little creek. A few yards aside from the path he found, under a patch of snow and dead leaves, the pink and white blossoms and the waxy green leaves of the trailing arbutus, that fragrant harbinger of the old mother's awakening. And June breathed in from the very breath of spring. Near by were turkey peas, which she had hunted and eaten many times. "You can't put that arbutus in a garden," said Hale. "It's as wild as a hawk." Presently he had the little girl listen to a pewee twittering in a thorn bush, and the lusty call of a robin from an apple tree. A bluebird flew overhead with a merry chirp, its wistful note of autumn long since forgotten. These were the first birds and flowers, he said, and June, knowing them only by sight, must know the name of each and the reason for that name, so that Hale found himself walking the woods with an interrogation point. And that he might not be confounded, he had later to dip up much forgotten lore. For every walk became a lesson in botany for June, such a passion did she betray at once for flowers, and he rarely had to tell her the same thing twice, since her memory was like a vice for everything, as he learned in time. Her eyes were quicker than his, too, and now she pointed to a snowy blossom with a deeply lobed leaf. "What's that?" "Bloodroot," said Hale, and he scratched the stem, and forth issued scarlet drops. "The Indians used to put it on their faces in tomahawks." She knew that word and nodded. "And I used to make red ink of it when I was a little boy." "No," said June. With the next look she found a tiny bunch of fuzzy hibiscus liver leaf. "What's liver?" Hale, looking at her glowing face and eyes and her perfect little body, imagined that she would never know unless told that she had one, and so he waved one hand vaguely at his chest. "It's an organ, and that herb is supposed to be good for it." "Organ? What's that?" "Oh, something inside you." June made the same gesture that Hale had. "Me?" "Yes," and then hopelessly, "but not there exactly." June's eyes had caught something else now, and she ran for it. "Oh!" It was a bunch of delicate anemones of intermediate shades between white and red, yellow, pink, and purple blue. "Those are anemones." "Anemones," repeated June. "Windflowers, because the wind is supposed to open them." And almost unconsciously Hale lapsed into a quotation: "And where a tear has dropped, a windflower blows." "What's that?" said June quickly. "That's poetry." "What's poetry?" Hale threw up both hands. "I don't know, but I'll read you some day." By that time she was gurgling with delight over a bunch of spring beauties that came up, root, stock, and all, when she reached for them. "Well, ain't they purty?" While they lay in her hand and she looked, the rose-veined petals began to close, the leaves to droop, and the stem go limp. "Oh," crooned June, "I won't pull up no more o' them." These little dream flowers found in the spring. More poetry, June. A little later he heard her repeating that line to herself. It was an easy step from poetry to flowers, and apparently June was groping for it. A few days later the serviceberries swung out, white stars on the low hillsides, but Hale could tell her nothing that she did not know about the serviceberry. Soon the dogwood swept in snowy gusts along the mountains, and from a bank of it one morning a redbird flamed and sang, "What cheer, what cheer, what cheer!" And like its scarlet coat the red bud had just burst into bloom. June knew the redbud, but she had never heard it called the Judas tree. You see, the red bud was supposed to be poisonous. It shakes in the wind and says to the bees, "Come on, little fellows, here's your nice fresh honey," and when they come it betrays and poisons them. "Well, what do you think of that?" said June indignantly, and Hale had to hedge a bit. "Well, I don't know whether it really does, but that's what they say." A little farther on the white stars of the trillium gleamed at them from the border of the woods, and near by June stooped over some lovely sky blue blossoms with yellow eyes. "Forget-me-nots," said Hale. June stooped to gather them with a radiant face. "Oh," she said, "is that what you call 'em?" "They aren't the real ones. They're false forget-me-nots." "Then I don't want 'em," said June. But they were beautiful and fragrant, and she added gently, "'Tain't their fault. I'm goin' to call 'em just forget-me-nots, and I'm givin' 'em to you," she said, "so that you won't." "Thank you," said Hale gravely, "I won't." They found larkspur, too. "Blue as the heaven it gazes at," quoted Hale. "What gazes?" "Looks." June looked up at the sky and down at the flower. "'Tain't," she said. "It's bluer." When he discovered something Hale did not know, he would say it was one of those "wand-flowers without a name." "My," said June at last, "seems like them wand-flowers is a mighty big fambly." "They are," laughed Hale, "for a bachelor like me." "Huh?" said June. Later they ran upon a yellow adder's tongues in a hollow, each blossom guarded by a pair of ear-like leaves. "Dutchman's breeches" and "wild bleeding hearts," a name that appealed greatly to the fancy of the romantic little lady, and thus together they followed the footsteps of that spring. And while she studied the flowers, Hale was studying the loveliest flower of them all, little June. About ferns, plants, and trees as well, he told her all he knew, and there seemed nothing in the skies, the green world of the leaves, or the underworld at her feet to which she was not magically responsive. Indeed, Hale had never seen a man, woman, or child so eager to learn. And one day, when she had apparently reached the limit of inquiry, she grew very thoughtful, and he watched her in silence a long while. "What's the matter, June?" he asked finally. "I was just wonderin' why. I'm always askin' why," said little June. She was learning in school, too, and she was happier there now, for there had been no more open teasing of the new pupil. Bob's championship saved her from that, and thereafter school changed straightway for June. Before that day she had kept apart from her schoolfellows at recess times as well as in the schoolroom. Two or three of the girls had made friendly advances to her, but she had shyly repelled them. Why, she hardly knew, and it was her lonely custom at recess time to build a playhouse at the foot of a great beech with moss, broken bits of bottles, stones. Once she found it torn to pieces, and from the look on the face of the tall mountain boy, Cal Heaton, who had grinned at her when she went up for her first lesson, and who was now Bob's arch enemy, she knew that he was the guilty one. Again, a day or two later, it was destroyed, and when she came down from the woods almost in tears, Bob happened to meet her in the road, and he made her tell the trouble she was in. Straightway he charged the trespasser with the deed, and was lied to for his pains. So after school that day he slipped up on the hill with the little girl and helped her rebuild again. "Now I'll lay for him," said Bob, "and catch him at it." "All right," said June, and she looked both her worry and her gratitude, so that Bob understood both, and he answered both with a nonchalant wave of one hand. "Never you mind, and don't you tell Mr. Hale," and June in dumb acquiescence crossed her heart and body. But the mountain boy was wary, and for 2 or 3 days the playhouse was undisturbed, and so Bob himself laid a trap. He mounted his horse immediately after school, rode past the mountain lad who was on his way